Hey guys, tonight we begin in a space that might feel familiar. You're standing in a quiet room, or at least it could be quiet, if not for the clutter. Shoes scattered near the doorway, books stacked haphazardly on a chair, old notes stuck to the wall, a drawer that barely closes. There's no real mess, just too much of everything. You pause there for a while, not yet moving, and in that stillness, something inside you mirrors the scene. Your thoughts, too, have been piling up. Half-formed worries, old arguments, things you meant to do, fears you haven't faced, emotions without names. You breathe in, slowly. This room is your mind tonight. You won't be able to control the world, but you can learn to control how you respond to it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take the first step into this imagined room, not with urgency, but with gentle intention. You aren't here to renovate overnight. You're here to understand. A calm curiosity begins to settle in you. Like Marcus Aurelius, who wrote quietly in his journal during a plague-ridden war camp, you don't need a perfect setting to begin. You just need a willingness to see clearly. He didn't write because he had answers. He wrote to clear space in his mind. Clarity isn't something you grasp by force. It arises slowly, the way light reveals a room at dawn. And here, surrounded by your own internal landscape, you begin to see which parts are merely noise. Some of the clutter, oddly, is made of good things, ambitions, relationships, dreams. But when stacked too high or held too tightly, even these can become obstructions. There's a Stoic truth whispered here. It's not what you have, but how you hold it. You bend slightly, picking up an imaginary object from the floor, a moment of embarrassment from years ago. You didn't even realize it was still lying there. You don't scold yourself. You just notice it, smile gently, and place it in a mental box. You're not here to erase the past, just to give it a place so it no longer trips you up. The Stoics teach us to make space within ourselves, not so we can empty out life, but so we can live it with freedom. Epictetus once suggested that people aren't disturbed by things, but by their judgments about things. And as you breathe into that idea, something loosens in your chest. Perhaps it isn't the past that's heavy, it's the stories you still tell about it. You glance around again. It's becoming easier to move. Even the silence feels less threatening now. You begin to notice how many moments in your day are filled with noise. The scroll, the buzz, the worry, the anticipation of the next thing. But here, in this still room, you allow yourself to pause. Ironically, that pause might be the most productive thing you've done all day. There's a strange comfort in realizing that not everything you think needs to be addressed. Some thoughts are just visitors. You can acknowledge them and then let them pass. Like clouds over a quiet sky, they shift and reshape themselves without your interference. But here's the paradox. The more you try to empty your mind, the more it resists. So instead, you focus on creating stillness, not silence. Space, not void. This is not about perfection. It's about clearing just enough to breathe. Remember, decluttering is not erasing, it's choosing. It's the quiet courage of letting go, not because you're forced to, but because peace is lighter than chaos. Some philosophers debate whether true inner peace is possible in a chaotic world. Can we really remain undisturbed while everything around us stirs? The Stoics would say, yes, not because the world becomes quiet, but because you've become anchored. Stillness is not the absence of motion, but the presence of direction. So you take another breath, not to fill yourself, but to steady the rhythm. A room becomes livable not because it's full, but because it's arranged. You aren't removing your thoughts tonight, you're placing them gently where they belong. And with that, you move deeper into the space, not to escape the world, but to meet it with greater clarity when morning comes. You find yourself lingering near the edges of this quiet room. There's a layer of fine dust on a shelf, barely visible until the light hits it just right. You drag your finger through it slowly, And something about that simple gesture stirs a memory. A conversation you had long ago. A sentence someone said in anger. A decision made out of fear. You didn't think it mattered anymore, but it's been resting here all this time. You realize the dust in your mind isn't just from recent days. It's from years of accumulated thinking, beliefs you never examined, emotions you kept postponing. The Stoics often spoke of the discipline of perception, the idea that our view of reality is often clouded by old layers of thought. Seneca once said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And now, looking at the dust, you understand. This isn't about what's happened to you. It's about what you've carried forward, even unconsciously. You pause and ask yourself gently, what am I still believing that no longer serves me? Like finding a faded letter in a drawer, you uncover a self-judgment that clings to your identity. Maybe it was born from a moment of failure. Maybe someone handed it to you when you were too young to question it. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to set it down. The process of dusting off these old thoughts isn't glamorous. There's no dramatic transformation. It's quiet, slow, almost imperceptible. And yet, each small gesture clears the way for something lighter. You recall how Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the Roman world, would rise early each morning and write to himself. Not proclamations or strategy, but reminders, anchors, like, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. He dusted off the mind before the world had a chance to clutter it. And you, in this moment, are doing the same, wiping away what no longer reflects the truth of who you are now. Sometimes, what we carry isn't even ours. You might find a belief given to you by a parent about how success should look, how love should feel, how failure defines worth. These thoughts gather dust not because they're wrong, but because they're unexamined. There's a paradox here. The older the thought, the more invisible its weight becomes. Like a shelf you've always known to be crooked. You stopped noticing it, stopped wondering why it tilts. But tonight you're noticing again. You take a slow, steady breath. Not every old thought must be thrown away. Some are part of your foundation, but all deserve attention. And attention is a kind of love. You move through this space not like a critic, but like a caretaker. You aren't attacking your mind, you're tending to it. And perhaps that's the most radical act of self-discipline, to tend rather than fix, to observe rather than react. You pick up another object this time, a memory of something that once made you feel small. You notice how often that voice still shows up. The voice that says, you're not ready yet. You should be better by now. Others are ahead of you. It's not shouting tonight, just whispering, soft enough to slip under your awareness, but you hear it now. And as you hear it, something shifts. You realize you don't have to believe every voice that speaks in your mind. This is a Stoic insight we don't talk about enough. That freedom doesn't begin when the world gets quiet. It begins when your judgments loosen their grip. Even Epictetus, born into slavery, understood this. That your inner world is yours alone to shape. That no one, not fate, not failure, not fear, has the final word in your mind. Of course, some philosophers argue the opposite, that the mind is too shaped by upbringing, culture, biology, that we're not as free as we think, and they're not entirely wrong. But here's what the Stoics offer, not a fantasy of total control, but a pathway to influence. A practice, not a promise. You don't need to erase every layer tonight. You just need to see clearly. So you sit figuratively in this space, dust on your hands, quiet in your breath, and you look around. What's still true for you? What can you dust off and keep? And what gently is it time to release? There's no rush. You've spent years building this inner space. Tonight isn't about judgment, it's about presence. And in that presence you begin to notice, beneath the layers, beneath the doubts, something steady, like the floor beneath a thick rug. Your attention rests there, still, soft, clear. You rise slowly and glance around the room again. The dust is lighter now. You've begun the work, not of forceful cleansing, but of gentle noticing. And with each step, the space feels less like a burden and more like a refuge. A sanctuary not for perfection, but for honesty. There's a small table in the corner of the room, On it sits a box. You open it curious. Inside are notes, scraps of thoughts, little lists, reminders, fragments of conversations you replay over and over. Some of them are written in your own handwriting. Others feel like they were scribbled by someone else entirely. These are the thoughts that repeat, that whisper at night when you try to rest, that hijack your attention in the middle of calm. Did I do enough? What if this falls apart? What do they think of me? You sort through the papers. Some are worn at the edges from overuse. They've traveled with you for years. Thoughts about your place in the world, about how things should be by now. And you notice a pattern. Many of them aren't rooted in reality. They're rooted in comparison. The Stoics had a word for this quiet chaos: fantasia, the impressions, assumptions, and appearances that flood the mind and distract from what is. They taught that a wise person learns to examine their thoughts, not obey them. You pick up a slip of paper, it reads, "You must always be productive." And you smile because you remember where it came from, a time when your worth felt tied to how busy you were. But tonight, that thought doesn't have the same hold. You crumple it gently and toss it in a small mental wastebasket, not in anger but in relief. Another note says, "You need everyone to like you." This one lingers longer, it's more sticky, more personal. You turn it over in your hand. Why is this one harder to let go? Because some clutter has sentimental value, even when it hurts. This is where the Stoic principle of the dichotomy of control returns like an old friend. You can't control how others perceive you. You can only control whether you live by your values. That insight doesn't erase the sting of rejection, but it gives you back your center. You place that thought back in the box for now. Not everything needs to be thrown away in one night. Some things ask to be revisited later with more strength. You begin sorting: which thoughts help me live well, which ones bring me closer to freedom, to peace. You're not just decluttering, you're curating. Like a museum of your own inner life, you decide what deserves to remain on display. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. You pause at that image. What colors have you let into your mind lately? Are they rich and grounding, or frantic and fading? You pick up a thought that feels fresh. I don't have to have all the answers tonight. You fold it neatly and set it aside like a compass you trust to use again. The room feels clearer already. There's breathing space now. The noise that once echoed in every corner has softened into a quiet hum. And yet, a thought arises. Am I doing this right? You chuckle because, of course, even in your effort to clear the mind will try to evaluate the process. But you remember, this isn't about doing it right. This is about doing it with care. Some philosophers argue that sorting thoughts is impossible, that our unconscious mind will always govern us more than we realize. But the Stoics would say, even if we cannot master everything, we can participate. We can shape. We can choose how we respond. And in choosing, we reclaim a little more of ourselves. You stretch your arms overhead as if to test the space you've created. It feels roomier, not in square footage but in sensation. The same life, the same mind, but a different relationship to it. There's a chair nearby. You sit not to rest but to reflect. What thoughts have you held onto simply because you've always had them? What assumptions have never been questioned? What if freedom begins not with escaping the world, but with escaping false beliefs about yourself? You glance down at the remaining scraps of paper. Some you'll revisit tomorrow, some you'll let go of tonight. Not everything must be resolved at once. Like a room slowly returning to order, your mind does not need to be empty. It only needs to be intentional. And so you close the box, not sealed shut, just closed for now. There's still more to see, more to sort. But for tonight, this is enough. You've made space for stillness. You've taken a step toward inner order. And most importantly, you've remembered that you are not your thoughts. You are the one who watches, who chooses. That awareness is where peace begins. You rise from the chair slowly. The space around you feels noticeably lighter. But not because everything has been removed, because something has shifted in how you hold what remains. You're no longer tangled in every passing thought. You're beginning to choose what stays and what goes. And that choosing, quiet as it is, becomes an act of power. There near the window sits a box you've avoided. It's heavier. Not full of mental noise or self-doubt, but of things you've tried to bury, regrets, guilt, grief, unspoken fears. You walk toward it gently, not with force, but with curiosity. You lift the lid. Inside, a memory surfaces. A time you said the wrong thing. A moment you disappointed someone you loved. Something you lost, not because you wanted to, but because life is indifferent to how tightly we hold. You touch the memory. It feels raw even after all this time. The Stoics don't shy away from pain. They walk straight into it with clarity. Epictetus reminded his students, what upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about these things. You breathe that in. Maybe this isn't about what happened. Maybe it's about what you still believe it says about you. You've held on to this because you thought it was penance. But tonight, you see more clearly. Holding on hasn't made you wiser. It's only made you heavier. Letting go doesn't mean erasing the past. It means releasing its control over the present. You remember how Seneca wrote letters near the end of his life, not as grand statements, but as intimate reflections. As if he knew that each day might be the last page. He wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of living poorly, of clinging to things that were never truly his. And you, too, see it now, the cost of holding on. Not just the emotional weight, but the space it takes from peace, joy, freedom. Letting go is often mistaken for weakness, but it takes great strength to loosen your grip on a story you've told yourself for years. You take another look into the box. There's a dream that didn't happen, a relationship that didn't become what you hoped, a version of you that never quite emerged. And here comes the paradox, quiet and true. Sometimes letting go isn't loss, it's liberation. There's a quiet resistance in you, a voice that says, but if I let this go, who will I be? You sit with that voice, you don't rush past it, and slowly you understand you will be someone lighter, someone present. Some philosophers argue that detachment is unnatural, that we are wired to hold on to people, memories, pain. But the Stoics suggest a different kind of detachment, not rejection, but right-sizing. Not cold indifference, but mature discernment. You don't need to stop loving what you've lost. You just need to stop being ruled by it. There's a deep tenderness in that, a grief that transforms into clarity. You pick up one item from the box, a mistake, you name it, you forgive it. Not to forget, but to give it a place in your story that doesn't demand your constant attention. Another object of fear. You look it in the eye. You ask, are you protecting me or are you holding me hostage? It doesn't answer, but you already know. You set it down. With each gesture, the room grows quieter, not silent, alive with space. Like a forest after rain, everything feels washed clean. You stand now, not to escape the past, but to honor how far you've come from it. Letting go has made room for breath, for thought, for something new to take root. This is where the Stoic practice turns inward. It's not about what you own or what you do. It's about how you carry yourself through what you cannot change. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself, objective judgment now at this very moment, unselfish action now, willing acceptance now. He didn't wait for ideal conditions. He practiced clarity in the middle of his empire's chaos. And you, tonight, in this room of your mind, practice the same. The box isn't empty, but it's no longer overflowing. You've begun the work, not of denying the past, but of recontextualizing it, of giving it structure so it no longer leaks into every quiet moment. You return the lid to the box, not with shame, but with reverence. You've let go of something tonight, or maybe it let go of you. Either way, you're lighter. You step back into the open space and notice the stillness that's taken its place. You find yourself standing in the center of the room now, and it's quieter than you remember. Not silent. No, silence has its own weight, but quiet in a way that invites your breath to deepen. The clutter, the dust, the old boxes faced some of it. Not all, not yet, but enough to feel the shift. And with that shift comes a realization. Everything you keep in your mind has a cost. Every lingering thought, Every unresolved conflict, every bit of noise, even the gentle kind, takes up space, energy, attention. You begin to understand something the Stoics understood well. The weight of the unexamined mind is not measured in volume but in tension. You walk slowly now, passing by a shelf lined with small objects. They're familiar, harmless, even. A compliment someone gave you that you replay often. A tiny success you cling to when things feel uncertain. A prediction about the future that you whisper to yourself to feel safe. None of it seems bad, and yet you pause. Even good things, when held too tightly, begin to take up space meant for peace. You recall a moment in your life, maybe not long ago, when you achieved something you worked hard for. And almost immediately after the pride settled came the pressure to maintain it, to exceed it, to not lose it. You weren't celebrating, you were protecting. The Stoics warn against this. They don't tell us to avoid joy, but to avoid attachment to what joy comes from. Because the joy is fleeting, but the attachment stays. You look at one item in particular, a belief you've outgrown but still carry. Something like, if I let my guard down, I'll fall behind. You hold it in your hand. It's grown heavier over time, not because it's truer, but because you've believed it longer. This is the hidden cost of holding on. Not just the clutter, but the shape it gives your life without you noticing. You arrange your days around old beliefs. You bend your decisions to protect them. You confuse familiar weight for importance. Seneca once observed that many people are miserable not because they are actively suffering, but because they are too afraid to put things down. You stand now with both hands open, literally or mentally, and you ask yourself, what am I carrying that no longer needs to be held? The question doesn't demand an answer. It just opens a door. Some philosophers argue that holding on is necessary, that without continuity there is no self. But the Stoics offer a subtler truth. You are not the same person you were 5 years ago, and that's not a flaw, that's growth. And yet growth requires space, not just in your calendar or your habits, but in your mind. You take another deep breath. The room, once cluttered, is beginning to breathe with you. The air moves easier. You notice a shadow in the corner, a leftover anxiety that clings out of habit more than truth. You nod to it, acknowledge it, but don't invite it forward. Not everything needs a fight. Some things just need to be left behind. This practice, the practice of mental simplicity, isn't about minimalism in the trendy sense. It's about clarity, about not mistaking quantity for meaning, about seeing how much lighter your life could feel if you stopped gripping every thought like it might run away. Marcus Aurelius was emperor of a vast empire, and yet he found his peace not in expansion but in reduction. He stripped away illusions, one by one, until what remained was just this: the present moment and how you meet it. You glance again at the shelf. You reach for one last item, a timeline, a belief about when things are supposed to happen. You smile. Of all the things you carry, this one has the strongest grip. And yet, what timeline has ever been sacred? You set it down gently. The room is quieter still. You've spent years building systems of thought to make sense of the world, and that's okay. But tonight you're reminded, your mind is not a warehouse, it's a home. And homes must be lived in, not just stored in. So you make space, not just by removing, but by choosing. You begin to trust that you don't need to hold everything to be whole. You let go, not in sadness, but in strength. And the cost, less than you feared. The reward, more room for joy. You turn from the shelf and face a corner you've barely noticed until now. It's dimly lit, tucked away from the main space. And in that corner, pieces of thought have been left in piles, some neat, some chaotic. Not discarded, but not attended to either. These are the unconscious patterns, the furniture of your inner world, arranged without question. A worn-out couch of self-doubt. A desk where perfectionism sits like an old lamp, always on, always buzzing. A narrow hallway where people-pleasing has lined the walls with mirrors, reflecting everyone else but never you. You stand before it not to judge, but to understand. The Stoics believed that philosophy isn't theory, it's architecture. that we're constantly shaping the structure of our minds, whether we know it or not. And like any room, the way your mind is arranged affects how you move, how you breathe, how you think. You remember how often you take the same emotional route, how criticism leads straight to shame, how failure reroutes you to panic, how uncertainty always sends you to overplanning. None of these paths are random. They're built into the layout. But tonight, you begin the subtle work of rearranging. You move slowly, mentally shifting one heavy belief to the side. I must always appear strong. You place it gently in the back, not because strength is wrong, but because constant performance is exhausting. You look at the perfectionism lamp. It's been left on so long, you've forgotten how to rest in dimness. You unplug it not forever, but for now. Let the room soften. You roll up a rug of expectations you've laid out for others, expectations they never agreed to. You see clearly now. Some of your emotional discomfort comes not from what people do, but from how tightly you grip your vision of how they should be. A Stoic idea settles in quietly. Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do, and you will be content. It's not about surrendering your standards. It's about making room for reality to exist as it is, not only as you've arranged it. You begin to imagine a different layout. A quiet chair of patience, placed near the window where light naturally falls. A small table of gratitude, not flashy but steady. You don't need to decorate the space. You just need to make it livable. And here's the irony. In rearranging your inner furniture, you find that freedom isn't about emptiness. It's about flow. You want to move through life without tripping over old habits, without rearranging your identity every time someone disapproves, without shrinking to fit spaces you've outgrown. You remember a moment from your own life, not long ago, where you overreacted. Not because of what was said, but because of how your mental room was arranged. The words hit a fragile shelf, knocked over something you hadn't secured. The problem wasn't the event. It was the layout. And now, as you realign these pieces, you realize something essential. You are not obligated to keep the emotional furniture someone else left behind. You smile because, yes, some of the clutter wasn't even yours to begin with. Parents, teachers, lovers, the world, they placed ideas in your space, some helpful, some harmful. You can keep what serves, and you can return the rest. Some philosophers insist that we are merely products of our environment, our upbringing, our past. That change is cosmetic, but the Stoics whisper otherwise. They say, you are shaped by what you practice, and tonight you are practicing space, deliberate space. You reposition a belief. I must respond immediately. You slide it away, giving yourself permission to pause. You dismantle a thought that says, I am behind. You set it beside the others where it becomes less intimidating, just another voice, not the truth. The room feels different now, still your mind, still full of you, but with room to move, to think, to be. You sit again, not on the couch of self-doubt, but in the chair you placed by the window. There's light here, there's breath here. There's a way forward here. And as the night deepens, you rest in the knowledge that you are always free to rearrange, always free to choose again. The layout is not fixed. The story is not over. From the chair near the window, you notice something you hadn't before, a faint stain on the floor near the center of the room. It's subtle, but it pulls your gaze. You get up and walk toward it. As you kneel beside it, you realize it's not just a mark, it's the residue of emotion. Old anger, disappointment, bitterness you thought had long since faded, but here it is, still soaked into the floorboards of your mind. You pause, fingers tracing the edge of it, not to scrub it away, but to understand what it's made of. The Stoics didn't ask us to suppress emotion. They asked us to master it, to observe it, examine it, and question whether it serves us. Anger, they warned, is like smoke. It clouds vision. And if left alone too long, it settles deep into everything. You recall a time someone wronged you. Maybe it was unfair, maybe it was cruel. Maybe it still echoes in your thoughts, reshaping your trust in others. You told yourself you moved on, but your body remembers. Your breath shortens when something similar appears. Your mind sharpens, bracing for pain. What you buried didn't vanish, it just became harder to find. You sit beside that stain, letting the memory rise, and instead of replaying it, you stay with the sensation, the tightness, the defense, the urge to justify or retaliate. Then you breathe through it. This is what the Stoics meant by inner discipline, not numbing yourself, but refusing to be ruled by feeling. You remember how Marcus Aurelius endured betrayal after betrayal and still wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice." That wasn't weakness. That was strength with a steady spine. You lift your gaze and something shifts. Maybe you don't need closure from that person. Maybe you don't need them to see or understand or apologize. Maybe what you need is space from the story. There's a quiet realization. Forgiveness is not about denying what happened. It's about denying it the right to poison what comes next. You place your hand over the stain, not to erase it, but to let it dry. It's part of the room now, but it doesn't define the room. Just like your pain is part of you, but not the shape of you. And there's humor here too, if you look closely. How often we've clung to anger like it was a treasure, defended it like it gave us value, all while it quietly drained our peace, one drop at a time. You smile at the absurdity, because sometimes the only thing standing between you and ease is the decision to stop carrying a grudge that no longer burns, but still smokes. A paradox emerges. You've spent so long thinking that if you let go of anger, they win. But now you see it, when you let go, you win. Because you get your space back, your clarity, yourself. Still, some philosophers argue that anger is essential, that it fuels justice, that it signals when something is wrong. And yes, there's truth there. Anger points, but it doesn't need to steer. You can feel its flare and still choose your next action with care. That is Stoicism, the ability to feel deeply and still act wisely. You stand now and look around the room. You notice other residues, hurt, envy, even moments of shame. They've left their mark, sure, but they're fading. You are seeing them clearly now. You are learning to tend rather than react. And here's something surprising. Beneath all that residue, beneath the anger and the ache, there is something softer. Compassion. For yourself. You weren't wrong to feel what you felt. You were just trying to survive, to protect your peace in a world that doesn't always honor it. But you don't need protection tonight. You need presence. So you take one last breath beside that stain. You bow your head, not in defeat, but in reverence for how far you've come. You've seen your shadow tonight, and you didn't flinch. You've cleaned not with force, but with patience. You've remembered peace doesn't mean forgetting. It means no longer bleeding from the same wound. And as you step away, something lifts. The room is still. The residue remains. But it no longer rules you. The light in the room has changed. It's softer now, more forgiving. Like the late afternoon sun that slants through half-closed blinds, touching only what's ready to be seen. And in this light, your attention falls on the wall to your left. There's a crack in it. Not large, not threatening, just there. A thin fracture in an otherwise smooth surface. You walk toward it. You've passed it before without looking too closely. But now, with space cleared and emotion softened, you're ready to examine it. This crack is your imperfection. Not one you hide, but one you've grown accustomed to ignoring. A flaw in how you speak or love or carry yourself. An anxiety. A recurring mistake. A part of you that has never quite matched the image you want the world to see. The Stoics weren't obsessed with flawlessness. Quite the opposite. They were obsessed with truth, and truth includes imperfection. You reach out and touch the crack. Rough edges, slightly uneven. It doesn't crumble beneath your fingers, it simply stays. Not mocking, not apologizing. Just existing like everything else in the room. You think of Epictetus, whose body was broken by a master before his mind ever found freedom. And yet he taught with joy, with humor. He knew that control wasn't about appearance, but alignment. About living in harmony with what is, not what ought to be. You take a breath. For years, you've treated flaws like threats, proof that you're behind, evidence that you're not enough. But tonight, something shifts. What if the crack doesn't mean brokenness? What if it means use? This wall has held up after all, through storms, through time, through all the clutter that once leaned against it. There's a Japanese art called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, so the fracture becomes part of the beauty, not hidden, highlighted. A reminder that something cracked doesn't mean something failed. The Stoics didn't use gold. They used clarity. They'd say, don't pretend to be perfect. Be a person who sees clearly and chooses well again and again. You sit beneath the crack not to repair it, but to accept it. And here's the paradox that rises. The more you accept your imperfection, the less power it has over you. Perfection is a heavy standard. It tightens the breath. It narrows your life to constant self-correction. But you're not here to perform. You're here to be. Still, the voices return, don't they? The ones that say you could be better, you should be further along by now. And maybe in a different moment you'd believe them. But tonight you respond with gentleness. I'm a work in motion. A process, not a performance. Some philosophers argue that this kind of acceptance risks complacency, that if you stop striving for better, you'll settle for less. But the Stoic view is more nuanced. Virtue isn't about appearing polished, it's about being internally aligned. A cracked wall that holds is more virtuous than a perfect one that collapses in silence. You smile now. There's humor here. How long you've tried to fix what never needed fixing. How many filters and masks you've worn, not to deceive others, but to protect yourself from your own judgment. And yet in this quiet room, in this moment of bare honesty, you don't feel exposed. You feel human, and that's enough. You lean back against the wall, letting your weight rest where once you might have hesitated, and the wall holds. Crack and all. You begin to see that the mind, like a home, was never meant to be flawless. It was meant to shelter, to grow, to endure. And in doing so, it would inevitably wear signs of living. Scuff marks of mistakes. Faded corners of forgotten dreams. But also, the warmth of wisdom, the shape of effort, the strength of showing up again and again. The room around you doesn't need to be perfect to be yours. You've begun to trust that. And as the light softens further, you sit with one final thought. You don't need to be flawless to be whole. You just need to be willing to see, to stay, to keep clearing space for truth, for imperfection, for peace. The air has settled into something calm now, still, not stagnant, like the pause between two waves. You sit quietly, and for the first time you notice the quiet itself. Not silence, not emptiness, but quiet that has texture. A subtle presence like a warm blanket. And in that quiet you begin to hear something else, your own inner voice. Not the loud one that narrates everything, not the anxious one that rehearses the future. The quieter one, the one that's been waiting patiently under the noise. It speaks slowly without judgment. It asks not what's next, but what matters. The Stoics believe the mind, once cleared, becomes fertile ground. Not for ambition or planning, but for values. This is the part of the journey where the absence of clutter makes room for intention. You begin to notice the difference between a full mind and a focused one. You think back to a time when your days were overflowing. Maybe recently. A schedule packed, a calendar full, a brain constantly buzzing. And yet, you felt hollow. That's the paradox. Doing more doesn't always mean living more. You see now that your inner clutter didn't come only from pain or fear, it came from distraction, from chasing everything, from trying to be everywhere. Tonight, you reclaim your focus. There's a low table in the center of the room now. On it rests a small notepad, the pages blank. For the first time, you don't feel rushed to fill them. You simply sit and ask, if I could build this space from the inside out, what would I make room for? What virtues would I bring to the forefront? The Stoics speak of 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. You pick one: temperance. Balance, you ask. What does a balanced life look like for me? Not in theory, but in practice. And here's the challenge. Temperance requires limits, and limits mean choosing. And choosing means letting go of everything that's merely fine to make room for what's essential. You don't need to say yes to every opportunity. You don't need to absorb every emotion. You don't need to entertain every thought that passes through. This is the foundation of discipline, not restriction, but refinement. You remember how Marcus Aurelius often wrote in brief sentences, not because he lacked complexity, but because he valued clarity. He didn't need 1,000 thoughts to feel centered. He needed only a few that rang true. And so do you. You write something on the pad, just one line. Maybe it says, "Live simply so I may think clearly," or maybe "Protect your peace like a flame," or simply "Let what matters rise." There's a kind of joy in this simplicity, not ecstatic but steady. The joy of alignment. Some philosophers argue that this kind of clarity is illusion, that life is too chaotic, too contingent to ever be simple. But the Stoics never said life was simple. They said your orientation toward life can be, and that is a choice renewed every day. You glance around the room. It's still yours, but it's becoming something else. Not just a space of reflection, but a space of direction. You're not just releasing now, you're recentering. You think of your days ahead, not with dread, not with fantasy, but with presence. How would you walk through them with more intention? How would you speak? How would you pause? What would you say no to, not out of avoidance, but out of deep, anchored yes to what truly matters? These are questions that don't demand immediate answers. They're like seeds. You plant them in the freshly cleared space of your mind, and then you tend to them gently. No rush, no pressure, just trust. Because when you've cleared enough noise, the signal emerges. When you stop clinging to every thought, you can hear the truth more easily. And it sounds something like this. You are enough to meet the day, not when you've done more, but when you've made space for what matters. You close the notebook. Not because you're finished, but because this is enough for now. The room feels different again. It doesn't ask for effort. It invites alignment. And you sit in that invitation calmly, fully. The notebook rests quietly on the table now, its single sentence still warm in your mind. You don't need to reread it. The words have settled into you, like water into soil. And with that settling comes the question, what do I do with the space I've made? You don't rush to answer. You've begun to see how often the urge to fill is a reflex, not a need. You've spent so much time reacting to life, grabbing at what's next, what's loudest, what others expect. But now, in this newly cleared room, the idea of intentional space feels radical. The Stoics taught that nature abhors a vacuum, but the wise person welcomes stillness. Not to escape, but to observe. To listen for the subtler call of values over impulses. You walk to a spot in the room where there was once a stack of distractions. Plans, half-finished ideas, shoulds inherited from people who didn't really know you. That space is empty now. And instead of rushing to replace it, you let it be. Here lies the next paradox. Emptiness can be a kind of abundance if you're willing to dwell in it. You remember a conversation you had once, maybe years ago. Someone asked, "So what's next for you?" And you answered automatically, "A goal, a project, a list." But tonight, if someone asked you that again, you might say, "Next, stillness, thoughtfulness, one clear breath." This is not resignation. It's orientation. You're not drifting, you're choosing not to be swept away. You walk to the window again. Outside, the world continues. It's busy, full of motion, opinion, demand. But it's distant now, not in a cold way, but in a way that feels manageable. You recall Epictetus' idea of the inner citadel, the unshakable space within. Not a fortress built on walls, but a quiet rootedness. A home within yourself where the noise of the world cannot command you. That's what this room is becoming. You turn inward again. You think of all the times you've filled your days to avoid discomfort. How busyness became a form of escape. How even worry became a kind of occupation, something to do when you didn't know how to be. The Stoics wouldn't shame that. They just ask, "How's that working for you?" You smile because the answer is clear. There's a kind of peace in not needing to justify every moment, in not needing every breath to be productive, in letting your worth exist quietly apart from action. You look around and feel it. The room isn't just cleaner, it's quieter, and the quiet is fertile. Some philosophers claim that too much space invites aimlessness, that without pressure people drift. But the Stoics offer a more generous truth. Pressure does not equal purpose. In fact, it often obscures it. Clarity emerges in stillness, not stress. You sit again. Not because you're tired, but because sitting with yourself is no longer uncomfortable. You let thoughts arise. Some are familiar, old habits knocking to see if you're still home. You don't invite them in. You nod at them like acquaintances you've outgrown. Then you return to the center, and from there something unexpected happens. A thought arises not from anxiety but from alignment. Something like, be useful but not at the cost of peace. Or let your actions reflect your values, not your fear. You don't rush to write it down. You let it echo. Because now, in this room, you trust your mind enough to hold it without clinging. You are no longer trying to control every thought. You are letting them come and go. This is the Stoic way, not to silence the mind but to sift it. To ask, is this thought useful? Is it virtuous? Does it help me live well? If not, let it pass. You rest your palms on your legs. Not in meditation, not in performance, just stillness. And you notice something quietly revolutionary. You are at peace. Not because everything is resolved, but because you no longer need everything to be. You've chosen to create space within. And in that space, life can breathe again. From your seated place, the world feels farther away, but not in a lonely sense. More like the world has receded into the background and you have finally come into focus. This space you've shaped in your mind, it isn't sterile. It's not silent like a void. It has weight, warmth, and resonance. It's becoming a sanctuary, a place you can return to again and again, no matter what chaos swirls outside. You stand slowly, stretching as though your body too is noticing the shift. There's a softness in your chest, a looseness in your shoulders. The body follows the mind, or maybe the two have just stopped wrestling for once. You walk to a new part of the room. There's a low shelf with a few things resting on it, deliberate things. Not clutter, not noise, just the essentials. And at the center is a small, framed sentence. Live according to nature. It's a phrase from the Stoics you've seen before. But only now does it begin to reveal its meaning, not in grand theory, but in lived experience. To live according to nature doesn't mean hugging trees or rejecting cities. It means aligning with what is, with reality, with the fundamental truths of human life: change, loss, breath, death, love, time, impermanence, agency. You sit beside the shelf and think, what is my nature? Not the roles you play, not the name you carry, but the core of you, what pulses beneath the roles and titles and expectations. And what's natural about being human? You remember. You forget things, you make mistakes, you need rest, you seek meaning, you long for connection, you fear endings. You start over again and again. And none of that makes you broken, it just makes you real. The Stoics believe that suffering comes not from life's difficulties, but from resisting them, from imagining you're above pain, above time, above death. But you're not. And the beauty is, you don't need to be. Because peace doesn't come from avoiding life. It comes from participating in it honestly. You touch the shelf again. One item, there is an old compass. Its needle isn't spinning wildly anymore. It points inward now. And you realize something tender and humbling. So much of your past pain came not from events themselves, but from hoping reality would be something other than it was. You wanted people to stay who needed to leave. You wanted to control outcomes that were never yours. You wanted certainty, when life only ever offered movement. This is where the Stoic practice becomes less about thinking and more about returning. Returning to what you can control. Returning to the present moment. Returning to the kind of person you want to be, even when things don't go your way, especially when they don't. You remember a moment, a recent one, where you didn't get what you wanted, where someone disappointed you or plans fell apart. And you see it differently now. That was life being life. Not an attack, just a fact. You return again to your breath. It's even, unforced. You are not resisting the world in this moment. You are with it. There's a kind of humility in that. A surrender, but not of defeat. A surrender that says, I don't need the world to cater to me. I just want to meet it well. Some philosophers insist this mindset is passive, that accepting reality means giving up. But the Stoics push back. They remind us that clarity and action are not opposites, they are partners. You see more clearly, so you act more cleanly. You accept the truth, so you waste less time fighting it. And here in this room, with your shelves cleared, your walls softened, your windows open, you begin to feel what it's like to be aligned. Not always right, not always certain, but intact. You take the compass, you hold it gently. Its direction is inward now, not because you're turning away from the world, but because you're returning to the one place you've always had the power to shape, your own mind. And from that place, you will respond to life, not react. From that place you will let go without collapsing. From that place you will build without needing everything to be permanent. Because now you see, clarity is not the end of the journey, it's the space from which the journey begins. The compass rests in your hand a little longer before you set it back down, gently, like a sacred object. You don't need to grip it. You don't need to carry it with you constantly. You only need to remember it's there, waiting, when direction feels blurred again. That's the quiet gift of clarity. It doesn't demand your constant attention. It waits in the stillness, steady as a mountain, returning the moment you return to yourself. You sit again, and this time your back finds ease against the wall. The crack you once noticed is still there. And now, somehow, it seems beautiful. Not fixed, just accepted. You scan the room with quiet eyes. There's less here now, and yet it feels more full. That's the paradox again. In removing excess, the essence stands out. And one essence that emerges now, gently, insistently, is freedom. Not the loud, external freedom the world sells. Not the kind that's tied to choice or travel or status, but the subtler, deeper freedom the Stoics spoke of. The kind no one can give you, because no one can take it away. You think of Viktor Frankl, though not a Stoic by label, who endured unspeakable suffering and yet discovered this. Everything can be taken from a person except the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That's what you feel settling inside now, that inner freedom. You are not free from pain, not free from uncertainty, not free from the chaos of the world, but you are free within it, free to respond, free to see, free to hold your center when the outside tries to shake it loose. This is what Epictetus taught, that while external events are not in our control, how we meet them, our judgments, our actions, our willingness to align with nature is. You begin to see how often you've confused reaction for strength, how often you've mistaken intensity for clarity. And now, in this slow, quiet space, you feel something truer. Strength is being able to pause, to choose your words, not just unleash them, to sit with discomfort, not flee it, to remain rooted when your pride begs you to bolt. This strength is subtle. It won't win applause, but it's yours, and it cannot be taken. Some thinkers argue that we are merely products of our environment, that if someone offends us, we must be offended. If life gets hard, we must suffer. But the Stoics say otherwise. They remind us. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is your power, and in that power is your freedom. You walk to the window again. Outside, the world churns. People rushing, cars honking, news flashing. The theater of urgency. And you are still. Not disengaged, just not absorbed. You remember a day, maybe this week, when the world's noise flooded your system, when your thoughts raced, your breath shortened, your clarity vanished. But you see now that it wasn't the world that overwhelmed you. It was your attachment to controlling it. You wanted people to behave. You wanted things to go your way. You wanted a calm sea, forgetting you live in weather. But now you laugh. Gently, because you see how futile it was. Not stupid, just human. And now you get to choose again, not from compulsion, but from calm. You step back from the window and place a small mat on the floor. You sit on it not as a ritual, but as an anchor. And here comes another truth, soft but firm. You are not your thoughts. You are the space in which they appear. And the one who chooses which to trust. Thoughts will rise. They'll try to take the stage. Some will demand your attention, others will whisper fear. Some will parade as truth but carry the scent of ego. Let them rise, let them fall. You choose what stays. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It's intimacy with discernment. You are not closing off from life. You're choosing how you meet it. You're not numbing. You're awakening. You're not escaping. You're remembering your role. You're not suppressing. You're selecting with care. And in that careful choosing and that slow clarity, you begin to live on purpose again. Not perfectly, but freely. The mat beneath you feels grounded, soft but firm. You sit in stillness, your back upright but not rigid. The breath comes easier now, unforced, like the wind that passes through open branches. You begin to realize how rare this feeling is, not because it's hard to find, but because it's hard to allow. Stillness is simple, but simplicity is difficult in a world that rewards noise. And yet here you are, no performance, no audience, just presence. You're not fixing anything. You're not improving anything. You're simply being with what is, and it's enough. There's a lamp nearby, small and warm. You turn it on and a quiet circle of light expands around you. It's not bright, but it reveals, like truth, like wisdom, like awareness. And as the light spreads, so does a new kind of noticing. You begin to see the last bits of mental clutter not as villains, but as misunderstandings. The thought that said you're behind. The one that whispered you're too much. Another that insists you have to earn rest. You see them for what they are. Old echoes, not prophecies, not fate. The Stoics remind us that many of our troubles come not from events, but from interpretations. From the stories we wrap around what happens. You sit with one of those stories now. A long-held belief, maybe decades old. It once protected you. Maybe still does in some ways, but it's heavy. And you're tired. You say to it not out loud but in spirit, "Thank you, but I don't need you anymore." And just like that it loosens. Not gone, but no longer gripping your throat. There's a strange kind of peace that follows this. Like closing a chapter you didn't realize was still open, not with a slam, but with care. Some philosophers insist that we are bound to our narratives, that to change our story is to betray ourselves. But the Stoics saw it differently. They saw the self not as a fixed identity, but as a practice. A constant returning to what's essential. They didn't say, "Be who you are." They said, "Be who you are meant to be." A soul aligned with virtue, a mind that sees clearly, a life that matches intention. You think of a time when your actions didn't match your values, not out of malice but out of habit. You were tired, pressured, distracted, and in that moment you became slightly misaligned. But here's what matters, you noticed. You wanted to realign, and that is everything. Virtue is not the absence of error, it's the willingness to return again and again to what matters. You breathe in. You think, what kind of person do I want to be, even when no one is watching? You exhale. What do I want this inner room to reflect when things get loud again? The answers don't come quickly, but they don't need to. You're no longer asking from urgency. You're asking from care. You rise from the mat. Your steps are slower now, more deliberate. You move through the room, noticing how each choice you made, what to keep, what to release, what to question, has shaped this space into something livable, not perfect, but honest. And in that honesty there is lightness. You realize now, decluttering the mind was never about creating silence. It was about creating clarity within the noise, so that when life returns with its waves, you're not tossed, you're rooted. You can still grieve, still falter, still forget. But now you have a place to return to, a mental home that's not crowded with expectation and shame, but curated with care. A place where your values live, where your freedom breathes, where your inner voice speaks in a steady tone. You pause by the doorway, imagining stepping back into the outer world tomorrow. The to-dos, the news, the people, the pulse of it all. But this time you won't carry the world on your shoulders. You'll meet it with a quiet that resists panic, with a center that doesn't shake so easily, with the slow confidence of someone who knows the calm is not out there, it's in here. You stand at the threshold of the room now, not to leave, but to notice the shape of it from this vantage point. The corners, once lost in shadow, now seem softened. The middle is open. The walls, though imperfect, feel trustworthy. You've made space, but not just by clearing. You've made space by deciding. And what you've decided gently, without drama, is to live with intention rather than accumulation. The Stoics warned against the tyranny of more possessions, more attention, more certainty. Because more, unexamined, becomes its own form of clutter. You remember the weight of that. Times when your mind chased outcomes it didn't need. When you hoarded opinions or replayed conversations or overcommitted because saying yes felt safer than setting a boundary. But now you see that the mind, like any space, is shaped not by what's added, but by what's allowed to remain. You walk back to the table and pick up the small notebook from earlier. It still holds that one sentence you wrote. Let what matters rise. Tonight you write a second, not a resolution, not a performance, just an observation. Maybe something like, peace is not found in escape but in alignment, or I don't need to earn stillness, I need to practice it. You pause, let the ink settle. Some philosophers insist that writing things down is trivial, that true knowledge lives in action. But the Stoics often wrote not to publish, not to impress, but to remember. Marcus Aurelius wrote for himself. Notes, reminders, anchors, because even emperors forget, especially emperors. You close the notebook, place it back on the shelf with reverence, not because it's precious, but because it's now part of this space. And then you sit again, not as a task, but as a return. You place one hand on your chest, the other on your leg, and this time you listen not for thoughts, but for the rhythm beneath them, your heartbeat, your breath, the subtle hum of simply being alive. This, too, is part of the clearing, because clutter isn't always cognitive. Sometimes it's the constant posture of defense, of bracing, of tension in your jaw or behind your eyes, of always leaning forward into what's next. But now you lean back, you let your spine rest, let your breath deepen, let the body know it no longer has to guard you from your own thoughts. This is the paradox again. In the act of letting go, you finally arrive. You think of one last teaching from Epictetus. He said, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. But he didn't mean freedom from responsibility. He meant freedom from illusion, from compulsion, from the chains we place around ourselves, softly over time until we forget we can take them off. You've taken some off tonight. You've returned to a part of yourself that isn't frantic. You've seen your mind not as a battlefield, but as a garden. And now you understand something few do, that you can live in a world that's chaotic and still not be chaotic within, that you can hold space for pain and still not let pain define you, that you can decline to control everything and still be deeply grounded in your own agency. Some people search for peace by numbing, others search for it by fleeing. But you tonight, you found it by clearing room for what was already there. Not silence, not perfection, but clarity. And now, as the lights dim a little further, as the window hums softly with night air, you begin to feel what this was all building toward, not a climax, not a conclusion, but a way of being, a posture toward life. You sit in it now, and you begin to understand this is what freedom feels like, not loud, not fast, but steady, quiet, yours. The room is almost entirely still now. The lamplight glows soft and low, painting gentle shadows across the floor. There's no more rearranging to do, no more fixing, nothing calling for your attention. The space has spoken, and you listened. This journey, which began with clutter and confusion, has led you not to some grand epiphany, but to something quieter and far more profound. Enough. Enough striving, enough comparison, enough noise. You've walked the full circle of your inner room, and now, as you rest here, you understand what the Stoics always meant when they spoke of living in accordance with nature. Not some outer ideal, but your inner truth. The breath deepens, the shoulders lower. There's a softness around your eyes, and a subtle lightness in your chest. Tonight, you've stepped out of the cycle of accumulation and into the clarity of discernment. You've laid down burdens that were never truly yours. You've swept out narratives that only served your fear. You've begun to trust that simplicity isn't lack, it's liberation. This, the Stoics would say, is how we approach freedom. Not by controlling the world, but by tending to our own mind. You sit in the quiet and recall the fragments of the path you took here. You remember the stain on the floor, old resentment, the crack in the wall, imperfection, the compass, direction, the shelf, virtue, each image a mirror, each moment a return to yourself. And through it all, the questions that once felt heavy have grown lighter. What if I fail? You now know failure doesn't define you. Your response does. What if I don't know the next step? You now know stillness is a step. What if I lose something important? You now know everything changes and peace comes from letting it. This is not resignation. It's awareness, a lucid kind of strength, the kind that allows you to live within the flow of life, not against it. You rise slowly and walk to the very center of the room. The space is open, welcoming, like a quiet invitation. No noise, no weight, just presence. You close your eyes, and here you practice one last thing: letting go without needing to replace, resting without needing to perform, simply being without apology, because your worth was never found in what you held onto. It was always in your capacity to let go with grace. The Stoics didn't seek enlightenment. They sought readiness. Readiness for loss, for love, for uncertainty, for the next morning. And tonight, as the lights dim further and the edges of thought blur into softness, you too feel that readiness. Not because you've solved everything, but because you've created space to meet it all with calm. You sit once more, one breath in, one breath out. You are not behind, you are not broken, you are here, and here is